Good morning, Maddie. How are you, bud? I hope you're fine. I I got up very early this morning, perfectly refreshed. I got 6 hours of sleep. I didn't drink anything after 6 p.m., so I didn't have to get up to pee that much. And so I woke up at 3, bright and fresh as a daisy, ready to start my day. So I've been watching celebrity interviews, showbiz interviews on YouTube. And I just finished watching this interview with this guy, Larry Thomas, who played the soup Nazi on Seinfeld and who's made a living off that role since 1995 by signing autographs at conventions. And in 2020, during the first year of COVID, they launched this thing called Cameo, where D-list celebrities will record a message, a 30-second message for your outgoing voicemail. And he was one of the first celebrities to sign up for that, and to this day, one of the more popular ones. And he said he made more money in 2020 from Cameo, from that one source, than he had made as an actor in his entire working life. And he made that money sitting in his living room, speaking into his phone in his spare time, when all the other actors in Hollywood were out of work and starving because it was COVID and they shut down the movie sets. And the soup Nazi is sitting in his living room in his underwear, making more money than he's made in his whole life. I love stories like that. They're very encouraging, aren't they? They give me hope for mankind. If that kind of shit can still happen in the world, we can't be doing too badly, right? I love it. I just blew out my tube all day yesterday, not a problem, as soon as I sit down to record. If I quit smoking, every ENT I've ever spoken to says you can either have surgery or you can quit smoking or you can live with it. So for 20 some years, I've just lived with it. Spent most of my life sitting alone in a cubicle, didn't have to talk to anybody, didn't have to speak at all. Wasn't a problem. Now, I'm a YouTube star. I talk all the time. Holiday Inn, I think we might just finish Expat Days today. And we will move on to She Kept the Bar Between Them. And I suppose today I'll put it on a thumb drive and go have it printed. This is how much we've done so far. All right, Holiday Inn. What's this about? I don't know. What is this about? Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember this. I don't know if this is still a case among expats. You tell me. Holiday Inn. My wife and I enjoyed Christmas dinner this year in very elegant company. We had been invited by the general manager of a swank hotel, the Boathouse, where I was working, to join his table. And the public relations manager offered to let us put our 2 kids and the nanny in. Well, that was me. I was the public relations manager, but I never said so in these columns. I thought it didn't fit the image of a romantic expat, an old Asia hand, to be the mouthpiece of a swanky hotel. So the public relations manager offered to let us put our 2 kids and the nanny into his office for the evening with a TV and room service. So because I am the closest thing Phuket has to a full-time journalist, that was true, Wheeli got her first real night out of the house since our daughter Mandy was born in July. 6 months. Shortly after sundown on Christmas Eve, I fought myself into a jacket and tie, and Wheeli fought herself into the last of 14 outfits that were tried on and violently discarded. Each of these outfits used to be good enough for Wilai to wear when dining with VIPs when she herself was a hotel PR manager. But they've all been in mothballs for the 3 years Wilai has spent either gestating or lactating, and evidently fashion or something has changed in that time. Finally, and this is one of the reasons Mem eventually made me stop writing first-person creative nonfiction in the newspapers. She didn't like me saying she had gained weight during pregnancy in the newspapers, so I moved to fiction. And when I moved to fiction, it produced the stories that we heard in Thai vignettes. Finally, we fought the kids and buoyed the nanny into an evening's worth of toys and an evening's worth of toys and linen into my Matchbox car, and off we went to our gala Yuletide on Kata Beach. We got the kids settled and joined our hosts in a cocktail reception by the pool. As I threw down my first glass of moderately good champagne, I noticed that there was a full moon. I thought that if that had happened on a night a little more than 2,000 years ago, nobody would have been the star. Nobody would have seen the Star of Bethlehem. And I might have been able to stay home and eat rice in front of the TV like usual. That's a very convoluted sentence. So if there had been a full moon on the night Jesus was born, the wise men would not have seen the Star of Bethlehem, and we would have no Christmas. That's what I was trying to say. The party finally moved into the dining room at an hour when I am normally deep into REM sleep. Wilai was seated on my right, and to her right was the matriarch of one of Phuket's 14 founding families. Child rearing is an icebreaker that lowers the social boundaries between women of any class, and my wife didn't feel the need to say a word to me for the rest of the evening. That left me dependent for social interaction on the hotel Swiss-German food and beverage manager on my left and a retired French industrialist across the table. Women are lucky to have their children's bowel movements as a social lubricant. Men enjoy no such unifying topic of conversation. Men are passionate about cars, sports, and money. But each class and nationality of us is familiar with different cars, sports, and profit margins. We are also passionate about sex, but I was hesitant to shout, "So, Emil, been getting any lately?" across the evergreen centerpiece. My two impromptu companions and I made uncomfortable small talk as the waiter served with excruciating slowness the tiny portions on big plates that pass for a meal at these events. By the time the thimblefuls of soup came, the three of us were so desperate that we actually made, "Ooh, it's yummy," faces at each other over our spoons, rather than strain for something to say. I'm convinced this is why men start wars, because it's easier for us to shoot at each other than think of something to talk about over dinner. I still believe that to be true. I had plenty to think about, but I couldn't share any of it with my two fellow prisoners. I thought about how Americans are often accused of lacking social graces, but we do, in fact, have manners where I come from. For instance, we don't bring telephones to the table. That has changed. We don't have servants. So nobody can abuse the help in an effort to make himself look like a man of high standards. Where I come from, everybody gets one fork and one spoon Nobody has to wait 30 minutes between courses. The guest of honor arrives on time, and there are second helpings available for those who want them. By the time the main course arrived, my companions and I had sunk to that lowest common denominator of expatriate dialogue, complaining about life on Phuket. We went through the whole litany: the traffic on the island's roads, the crowding on the beaches, the way they drive, and the unending construction that is turning our island into one huge plain of red dirt dotted with yellow bulldozers. All still true. It was an ugly, vicious, petty conversation, but it kept our mouths busy between sips of overtaxed wine and bites of overdesigned food. Then the Frenchman said, "You know what I miss? I miss the change of season. I miss trees that turn red." The Swiss perked up and said, "Yeah, I miss it too. Always the sun rises at the same time and sets at the same time. Always the same temperature. Maybe it rains, maybe it doesn't. But otherwise you can't tell December from July. When the general manager told me to prepare for Christmas, I said, 'What? We just had Easter.'" "I miss snow," I said, for the first time that evening, making a comment off the top of my head, and the window displays in the department stores on Fifth Avenue. Suddenly, we were all talking at once, interrupting each other and gesturing wildly. I miss coming inside a warm house on a really cold night. I miss the stillness of a winter's night. Yes, and the sounds that carry so far on a night like that. Turned out to be the most enjoyable conversation I've had in months. I cannot remember what the dessert was, but when the waiter was clearing away my plate and my wife informed me that we were leaving, I felt refreshed and invigorated. The kids and the nanny were already in the car, and with all of us in there, we had to turn on the air conditioning or suffocate. Air conditioning on Christmas Eve. I wonder if someday I will miss that. Fuck yes, I did. Yeah, air conditioning on Christmas Eve. I missed that for 25 long fucking years. And now all I do is complain about the heat and how sweaty I am and how I have to sit in front of a fan 24/7 and how it blows my hair around on camera. Bottom line, Steve likes to complain. Made a living complaining in the newspapers for 7 years. You know, I was writing these at the time. 95 is when that actor, Larry Thomas, created the character of the Soup Nazi. And this column was probably 95. Mandy was born in 96, so the Soup Nazi was about a year old when I wrote this. And just as he has made a living off that one line for all those years, I just got a statement from Amazon day before yesterday, I think, or yesterday. And I made about $60 off these stories, off these books last month. Typically, I have made about $1 a day or $30 a month selling the stories I wrote back in the 90s, just like Larry Thomas. Now he's, making buku bucks, and I'm not, I'm making $2 a day, but that's $2 a day. That's lunch. I typically spend 60, 70 baht for lunch. Maybe 40 baht, as cheap as 40 baht. So 70 baht's $2. Amazon, these old stories are buying me lunch every day, every single day. 25, 30 years after I wrote them. That's not bad. I'll take that. I'll take that. And I'm still getting attention from strangers. That's the point, isn't it, Steve? Bus stop. Oh, all right. This is about mui, which you have to say correctly. Mui in the wrong tone means pubic hair, and mui in the correct tone, which is a fairly common woman's name. What's it mean? Oh, I've forgotten. I've known 2 prostitutes named Mui, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly there. But yeah, if you say it wrong, it means pubic hair. I met this girl and spent one night with her and wanted to write a story about her. And I went to the bus station, took a friend to the bus station, and so I combined those 2 events. I broke the cardinal rule of creative nonfiction and made something up. But what I say about Mui is correct, and what I say is true, and what I say about why I enjoy airports and train stations and bus stations is true. Bus stop. I took my friend Barney to the bus station yesterday. Oh, I ended up not liking this guy at all. He turned out to be a real shithead. But I over the years, our relationship had developed, and at this time, I was still driving him to the bus station. He's going back to work in the sandbox, directing traffic at some industrial airstrip in the Emirates. Twice a year, I pick him up from the same grungy bungalow in Qatar, run him into town, and pour him into adjoining seats on the VIP bus to Bangkok. There's rarely a goodbye because he's usually unconscious, but I always get a nice thank you card about 2 weeks later. Yeah, in the mail. You know, Barney, his name wasn't Barney, I forget his name now. I fell out with him because he had this very vivid fantasy life. And he was the typical sexpat. He'd come, I think he did 2 months on work and 1 month off. So every 3 months, he'd come spend a month on Phuket. And he kept a little house, he rented a little house. And he had this whole fantasy life about how his landlord had introduced him to his 16-year-old niece or something, and she needed money to go to school. So the niece would come by Barney's house every afternoon after school in her uniform and do anything he wanted for her, and he would invent all of these sexual escapades with this schoolgirl. And it was all just fantasy. I don't mind people having fantasies, even schoolgirl fantasies, but you know, to try to pass them off to your friends as truth. And I'm sure that worked when he went back to the Emirates and he was living in the barracks with the other guys in a country where you couldn't buy pussy or alcohol. I'm sure they entertained each other in the evenings by sharing these fantasies. But doing it on Phuket, when people meet you at the brothels and they see that you're just going out in the evening and paying for sex like anybody else, if you've got this girl showing up at your house in her school uniform at 3:30 every afternoon, and she'll do anything you tell her to do because she's desperate for money, would you then go out in the evening to the soapy massage like anybody else? Yeah, I don't think so. And would a girl do that openly on the property of her uncle? You know, where the landlord knows who she is and what she's doing. And yeah, I just, the whole thing, I didn't believe it. And eventually him telling these stories, I just got sick of it and stopped hanging out with Barney and stopped driving him to the bus depot. I take Barney to the bus for 2 reasons. The first is that I owe Barney a lifetime of favors for something that happened years ago. No, I didn't. Exactly what is none of your business, because Steve doesn't want to have to think up a story of why I owe Barney a ride to the bus stop. The second reason is because I have a thing for hanging around in points of transit. This is very true to this day. The best part of plane travel for me is sitting for hours in the airport. I love it. I just watch people for hours. Jimmy Stewart says in It's a Wonderful Life that the most exciting sounds in the world are airplane engines, anchor chains, and train whistles. Here on Phuket, you can add to the list the sound of air brakes as a bus revs down for the checkpoint on the bridge to Phang. So there was a checkpoint at the Saracen Bridge in 1995, 96. I had thought that had come with COVID, that big, elaborate construction, that useless piece of waste of taxpayers' dollars at the Saracen Bridge. I don't know if you've ever been to Phuket. It's the only place internally in Thailand where there's a military checkpoint between provinces. There are military checkpoints, obviously, on the external borders, but there's no military checkpoint between Bangkok and Nakhon Nayok. There's no checkpoint between Luli and wherever, but there is a military, full-on military checkpoint at the bridge from Phang to Phuket. I don't know, maybe that's because where it's convenient. You cannot avoid that bridge. It's the only way onto the island other than by boat. Whereas you put a military checkpoint between Bangkok and Nakhon Nayok, there's 100 different roads you can go by to circumvent that checkpoint. Maybe that's why. I don't know. I spent a lot of time traveling as a kid. Yes, I did. Attending 7 schools by the time I was 13. These days, my traveling is limited to the Penang Visa Express. So every chance I get, I go hang out for an hour or two at the bus stop, the bus depot. I've done this everywhere I've ever lived, true, and it's always worth the time. Whenever I drop Barney off at the bus depot, I always stay for a while after his bus leaves. I find an empty bench in the shade with a good view of the departure gates. I grab a snack and I settle in to watch the show. Yesterday was pretty typical, lots of noise, cigarette smoke, and diesel exhaust. Thais eating dried squid and farang guzzling bottled water. Tearful separations and joyful reunions, and people who had lost their way. More drama than a whole season at La Scala, and tickets to the show are free. My kind of heaven. Crowded, dirty, confused, and if I had dropped dead, it would have taken weeks to identify the body, since Wilai didn't know where I'd gone, and I usually don't carry any identification. Just a red banknote in my hat brim for emergencies. Now I don't even carry money. I don't. My pockets are usually empty. I don't carry the phone. I don't carry my wallet unless I'm specifically going to buy something. I don't wear underwear. I wear a shirt and shorts and flip-flops, and that's it. And my glasses. That's it. I have a single piece of jewelry. That's a dime. That's a Roosevelt dime. But no, I don't carry ID. I don't carry cards. Typically, I leave the house. I don't even carry my keys. I put them under the mat. I enjoyed myself for a while, listening, watching, and nibbling some squid. Then, just as I was dropping the plastic squid bag into the trash and fishing in my pocket for my keys, I saw her. It was a vivid moment, a small taste of life on Phuket, preserved like a slow dolly shot from a private movie in my mind. See, there was this girl. How many Phuket stories begin that way? How many stories set anywhere begin that way? In this story, her name is Mui, and she's an art major at Thammasat University. But during semester break, she comes down to Phuket to work for Rice Money as a charming hostess in our most exclusive members club. She's not a prostitute. The club has other girls who do that, but Mui's employment entails greeting guests and getting them set up at tables or VIP rooms and making sure they're happy with the girls who come to share their table. But the mere fact that Mui is not a sex worker and her willowy frame and always slightly sad expression makes her almost irresistible to the men who pay a high price for the gold plastic card in their wallets that gain them admission to this club. Mui's not a prostitute, but a girl's gotta eat, and a girl's family's gotta eat. So sometimes often, Mui will allow a wealthy and persistent man to pay an extremely high price, up to 3 times for what he might pay for one of the girls whose job it is to have sex with men, for the privilege of meeting Mui for a few hours in a nice hotel room after her shift at the club is over. I have heard it said that Mui provided nothing special in the bedroom. She did not. In fact, the best that could be said for her was that she tried hard to hide her impatience that it be over. But even so, the men who took her out always bragged to their friends about it. You know the starfish? Yeah. Mui was a starfish. Bless her heart, sweet thing. About a year ago, I met Mui through another girl at the club who knew I wrote stories for a living. Mui wanted some writing done, but not a letter to a boyfriend or a string of boyfriends in foreign countries, which is the kind of writing I was used to providing for young ladies who worked in member clubs. Mui wanted me to write her resume. Yeah. And so I did, because I write for a living. And a guy's got to eat, and a guy's family has got to eat. I interviewed her about her qualifications, education, special skills, and career goals. Then I delivered 50 copies of the finished document to her at the club, where she accepted the thick manila envelope at her little podium immediately inside the front door. Since I don't have one of those gold plastic cards in my wallet, this was as far as I was allowed to come into the room. No, I was invited in. I knew Karen Smith, the operator. This was called the Penthouse, this club. In the column, the newspaper was very clear. I was not to ever suggest I participated in the sex industry as a consumer. And my wife sometimes would read these things or try to read them, or another farang would tell his wife, Steve said this, and the wife would tell Mem, Steve said that you've gained weight since you got pregnant, then. So I was always a disinterested, disconnected observer in these things. I could never say Mui was a starfish in the newspaper. She examined the document carefully by the light of the pen light she always carried in the club, questioned me on a few of the English words she didn't understand, and she paid me from her purse. So back to the bus depot. The tracking shot that I'll carry in my head forever goes like this. A slow sweep across the front of a chrome and day-glow intercity bus, past the windscreen full of Buddha images and bored driver, down a line of people waiting to board the bus. People with bundles tied up in brown paper and string, people with nylon backpacks and from Harrods, Thai ladies and farang men exchanging addresses and endearments and bank account numbers in a babble of languages. Lots of "see you next year." And at the very end of the line, the dolly stops and we see her, Mui, slim and cool, looking like the president of the junior class in a black skirt that goes below her knees and a simple white blouse, a small gold Buddha amulet in a delicate chain around her neck. A mane of thick black hair is swept off one shoulder. Her only baggage is a small clutch purse and the big Mary Haas Thai English Student's Dictionary, too big to put in the purse and too precious to check in the luggage compartment. The camera pulls back to reveal that she is surrounded, literally surrounded, by a small and extremely tense group of men, all of them trying hard to be the last to say goodbye. I recognize some of these men. One runs a shrimp farm. One has a couple of good Italian restaurants on Patong Beach. The group is about half Thai and half farang. The Thais look scared as hell that someone they know will see them there. And there's one boy of no more than 20 years with bad skin and a prominent Adam's apple. I know Mui's habits, and I would bet hard currency that she'd never let this nervous, twitchy adolescent come near her. But I could imagine him spending his Phuket holiday in the club, getting in with his father's card, never coming within arm's reach, but never taking his eyes off of her, just as he was doing now. Mui is being friendly but cool toward her claque, keeping exactly the correct physical distance appropriate for a Tamasat Jr. who finds herself in public with a group of men to whom she is not related. She smiles warmly, but briefly, and hides the smile behind her hand. She makes no move toward accepting the single rose that the Italian restaurateur is offering. She's obviously eager to be on her way. The camera reverses as the driver admits his passengers, and we watch Mui and her entourage as they approach the door, and she climbs aboard. She selects a seat at the opposite side of the bus from the gaggle of men, and they disperse in a hurry without a glance or a word for each other. Fade to black. When I drove out of the parking lot, the young boy was still standing on the platform, watching the blue smoke of the bus exhaust drift up over the sun-softened road tar. I thought of stopping and offering a beer and some of that worldly expat advice that I get paid to put in the newspaper. But no amount of that crap can soothe a kicked puppy. And anyway, that red bill in my hat band is for my own emergencies, emotional and otherwise. And you never know when I might be left on the platform of one of my beloved points of transit, breathing the exhaust fumes and needing that beer. I don't know how common that still is. You might be able to tell me. It used to be that there was a whole range of women's participation in the commercial sex industry, from lifelong hardcore prostitutes who had no other job and never did and never will, and, quote, good girls who tended bar or in this case, got men settled into a members club, hostesses. Maybe on these days on the social media apps, the dating apps, maybe you can meet a part-timer. I don't know. I haven't done a Millionaire's Weekend on Phuket for 2 years. I don't know what the situation is. I think the first year I was here, when I was doing that, I was still going to Phuket and spending money for a weekend a month of that lifestyle. The women I was meeting, and I was just going to the street bars in Kata Beach and Punpon Plaza, the massage on Punpon Plaza. They were hardened prostitutes. They were still youngish, under 30, but they were flat out, working girls. They were sex workers. I did not ever meet anybody I thought was part-timing or not even doing sex work at all, just tending bar, doing the books, whatever, just giving massage not offering a hand job with it. But again, my experience these days is very, very slim. Oh, Gardens of Stone. I love this one. This is word for word true. This is just a description of something that happened. I do not remember now, 30 years later, whether I actually saw a young man standing at the bus, having seen the girl of his dreams leave to go home, and he's left standing. I don't know. I remember Mui very well. I remember her in the club very well. I did not see her at the bus stop, but I must have seen something at the bus depot that triggered that half of the story. I don't remember that now, but this, Gardens of Stone, this just happened exactly the way I'm going to describe it. One of the interesting things about the English language press in Thailand is how widely it is distributed. I've seen copies of The Nation on the racks next to Thairat and Grizzly Auto Accident Photo Weekly in Rayong, Ranong, and Yala. That's a tongue twister. That's a speaking exercise when you're studying Thai. Ranong, Rayong, Yala. Ranong, Rayong, Yala. Those are three provinces, obviously, in Thailand. And it helps you to roll your R's and differentiate between the Y sound and the R sound. Ranong, Rayong, Yala. Every time I ask the vendor if he actually sells copies of the newspaper, I learned that there's a Danish marine biologist doing dugong research in the local estuary, or a Japanese engineer at the local sugarcane mill who buys the paper religiously. We foreigners are scattered far and wide throughout the kingdom, and sometimes we're found in very odd places doing very odd things. Today, the largest segment of expatriates in Thailand, if we don't count Khmers, Laos, and Burmese, are the Japanese working in the auto plants. There are more Japanese here now than any other nationality, more than Americans, Canadians, Brits, Aussies. The Japanese there's a ton of them here, and they have their own bars and streets of bars in Bangkok they go to. The first time my wife, Wilai, ever took me to her family's ancestral home in Nakhon Si Thammarat was for a Songkran celebration. The first day on the old home place, her grandfather, Pota, spent a few hours showing me around his 10 rai of coconut trees and several photo albums documenting his 30 years as provincial superintendent of schools. Her aunt, Masom, stuffed me full of local delicacies, and her uncle Nalek, in concert with some of the male cousins, got me drunk and smoked all my cigarettes. At the end of the day, Wilai tucked me into the bed in which her grandmother had been born, given birth 6 times, and died. And the following morning, the family was at a loss as to what to do with their new, tall, pale, hairy son-in-law. Yeah, I assume they had bought a new mattress, but the room that we slept in when we went to Nakhon was the master bedroom. Grandpa couldn't sleep up there. He couldn't go up the stairs anymore. But that was the room where his wife had been born. It was her family's house. And she had been born in that bed. She had given birth 6 times in that bed, and she had died in that bed. And that's the bed we slept in the room we slept in. So I was told. I was hungover, reduced to smoking Krong tips, and in a foul mood. Neighbors were coming by to stare at me, and I was in no way presentable. Nalek saved the day by suggesting a trip to visit the local farang. I agreed to go because it would be a 4-day holiday, and I'd forgotten to bring any books. I thought maybe the guy would be a reader, and I could borrow something to read. Nalek piled us into his new pickup truck and bounced us over 30 kilometers of rough road through endless rubber groves and rice paddies, proving once and for all that the term local has different definitions in New York and Nakhon Si Thammarat. Finally, we climbed an almost vertical hill and came upon a wrought iron gate set into a brick wall and that circled about 2 rai of land on the crest of a hill. The gate was ajar, and Nalek said we should go right on inside, suggesting that while we visited the farang, he would go into town and buy me some cigarettes and a newspaper. Wilai and I entered the grounds and followed a neat gravel footpath toward a little bungalow surrounded by rose arbors. Dozens of kinds of flowering shrubs crowded around rock gardens and fish ponds full of koi that had to be worth 50,000 baht a head. Fake Greco-Roman statuary assumed martial poses in artificial grottos, and honeybees lumbered from blossom to blossom in an embarrassment of riches. I knew what Wilai was thinking. You're a farang, so how come we don't live in a house like this? We walked toward the sound of electric hedge clippers coming from behind a topiary seal, balancing a ball on the end of his nose, and surprised a 60-ish man in a battered solar topi in the act of trimming the seal's flipper tips. He was indeed farang, slightly obese and lobster red from working shirtless in the sun. Cliched enough to be a character in a political cartoon in the Phuket Gazette. Oh, the cartoonists used to love to make fun of farang in the newspapers. How they drew us was an embarrassment. How you doing? I asked him, and he jumped 3 feet in the air and dropped his hedge clippers. He hit the ground running and made the front door in 3 strides. My New York-trained ears heard the unmistakable sound of a deadbolt lock being thrown home, and then Wilai and I were alone with the buzzing of the bees and the chatter of the electric hedge clippers chewing gravel. Wilai looked at each other and Wilai and I looked at each other and we shrugged. We began to approach the door, and halfway there I noticed 4 pairs of eyes staring at us through the Venetian blinds in a big picture window next to the door. 1 pair of eyes was blue, the other 3 dark brown. Before we reached the steps, the door opened just a crack, and a very petite Thai woman, who was either just approaching 40 or just recently slipped gracefully past it, came out through the narrow opening. The door shut behind her, and again I heard the shunk of the deadbolt lock. The woman faced us from the top step with her fists on her hips, and in a heavy European accent asked, "What you want?" Wilai addressed her in Thai, saying, "Excuse us, elder sister. My husband has come to meet the farang who lives here. He's lonely at my family's house and he wants to borrow some books." The woman sized me up, evidently not liking what she saw. Without taking her eyes off me, she said in Thai, "Ao man ok, see! Take it out, see!" Now, Wilai doesn't much care if somebody calls me an it. Ao man ok, not ao khao ok. Ao man ok, take it out. But nobody uses the command verb form si with her except Bota and the general manager of her hotel. True. Haughty woman, my ex-wife. She had pretensions. I felt her drawing breath beside me and I cringed out of habit. Before she could say, "Listen, sister, do you know who I am?" The door had opened again, and the mean little troll had disappeared back into the hall of the Mountain King. Wilai sputtered and fumed, and I wondered if it was safe to turn our backs on that big picture window as we made a strategic withdrawal to the gate. Wilai spent the time while we waited on the roadside for Naalek, plotting a revenge that involved phone calls to every influential person in her Rolodex. And I toyed with the idea of dropping that hedge clipper, still plugged in to 220 volts and still trying to dig its way to America, into one of the ponds full of expensive, useless carp. Zap! Eventually, Nalek returned, proudly presenting me with a 3-day-old copy of The Nation and a pack of Rothman's cigarettes. He said that the local grocer carried these items for the very farang in the shadow of whose gate we had been trying to find shelter from the midday sun for the past hour. We went back to Bota's house, and Wilai complained to the family for 2 days about how the neighborhood had changed since she was a little girl. I spent that first Songkran soaking wet, of course, rationing my stale Rothmans and memorizing every paragraph in that single copy of The Nation. We've been back to Nakhon for many Songkran celebrations since then, but I've never been back to visit the mysterious farang in his enchanted or cursed garden. I do sometimes think of him reading this column, though, and if he is today, I want to reassure him that I don't work for Interpol or for a divorce lawyer or for the mafia or any tax collection agency. I'm just a writer, and all I wanted was to borrow a book. But you'd better watch out for Wilai, because she's still angry. Yeah, used to be a lot of guys on the lam here. I don't know if there are now. It's probably harder to be on the lam these days. But there used to be a lot of guys who were on the run for something, and they weren't social. They found some place way out in the boonies to live, and because there was nothing for them to do, they worked on their gardens. It's a wonderful life. What am I looking at? Oh, yeah. This is another a description of just something that happened. This morning, I thought it was going to be a letter to the editor kind of day. Our nanny, Pui, the 13-year-old undocumented Burmese who came with us from Ranong when our daughter Mandy was born, ran away a week ago, leaving behind half of her clothes and my heartbroken 2-year-old son. Since Mandy is still breastfeeding, most of Pui's duties involved our older child, Andy, and she's the 8th nanny who's thrown up her hands at working for my wife and bolted the barn since Andy was born. Each time my son goes through a week-long period of infantile mourning, refusing to eat and taking 2 big steps backwards on the potty training trail. I began this day playing Mary Poppins, while Andy worked through his abandonment issues by repeatedly hitting me in the back of the head with his stuffed clown. But between blows, I was watching the clock as the minutes before a crucial business meeting slipped away, lost forever. Since Pui's departure, Andy has refused to speak anything but Thai, a fortune invested in the entire Dr. Seuss catalog, and my son still asks for kai kap mu si kiao, green eggs and ham, for breakfast. I finally wrestled Mr. Clown away from him and got him bathed and dressed and settled in front of the barely animated puppets of Channel 7's Chao Kun Tong, while 61 recorded hours of Sesame Street languished in the cupboard, unwatched since Pui left. Without live-in help, the idea of my wife Wilai actually cooking something is about as likely as an igloo in Korat, so I got in the car to go buy Kanom Tin. Ours used to be a very quiet, very pleasant suburban road until the vast swamp behind my house was filled in to make way for 700 semi-detached bungalows. Since then, the road has been full of careening 10-wheel trucks, overloaded with drunken construction workers at night. That's a weird sentence. Oh no, since then the road has been full of careening 10-wheel trucks overloaded with dirt in the daytime and unmuffled two-stroke motorcycles overloaded with drunken construction workers at night. Yeah. Then, last rainy season, all the water that used to settle into the swamp instead flooded the road. And since that was a nuisance to the construction company, the province began 2 weeks ago to widen and raise the road. Now, when I leave my compound, I must climb a meter-high embankment to enter the road. And each time I do, I am reminded that with the road raised and the swamp filled, the only place left for all that rainwater to go is into my kitchen. Wheeli and I will no doubt be moving before the next monsoons. But until then, leaving my house is like driving onto an unpaved airport runway. Except this runway is full of construction vehicles and commuters on their way to work, all of them jockeying for position without benefit of lane markers, shoulders, or traffic lights. I was halfway to the noodle stand this morning when I was faced with a 10-wheel truck towing a trailer full of hot asphalt, creeping toward me in what would have been my lane if there had been any white lines in the road. Next to him was a steamroller, and as they rolled along in tandem, the drivers were engaged in a lively conversation, neither one watching the road ahead. Passing the steamroller, but very slowly, was a Muslim grandfather and 3 of his grandsons on their way to the market, riding an ancient motorcycle with a sidecar full of fresh fish. Passing the fish, going at least 100 kilometers an hour, was a brand new Isuzu pickup truck driven by a man who was screaming into a cell phone as he drove. All 4 of these vehicles were coming straight at me, filling the road edge to edge. A glance in my mirror showed 2 motorcycles, each driven by a young man in a hotel chef's uniform, coming up to pass me, one on each side. I stomped on the brakes and I held my breath. The 2 chefs flashed by me to weave gracefully between the tar truck and the steamroller, and I heard gravel spatter my car as buckshot as the pickup truck rocketed by me. I regained enough control of my car to cut in front of the steamroller and the fishmobile and take the pickup's lane, a dramatic maneuver that put me 3 whole lanes from where I started and on the wrong side of the road. I rolled to a stop in front of the noodle stand, cursing every living thing between Afghanistan and Hawaii. When I got home, I dumped my bounty of plastic bags and rubber bands onto the dining table, and I ran for the bathroom to grab a shower. In 2 minutes, I was rushing out the door, but Andy wasn't going to let me get away without a struggle. "By doy," he said, though he knows how to say, "May I go too, please?" I let him come with me to the backyard, hoping that a ride from there to the front door would appease him. And there I was confronted with the most grievous insult of the morning. A backhoe installing sewers in the construction site was stacking sections of concrete pipe in my yard just behind my car, blocking my exit. Oh, I picked up Andy and I rushed to the low wall between my property and theirs, ready to scream bloody murder. But when the driver saw us, he popped open his door and asked if Andy wanted to come sit inside. Andy looked at me and said, "Daimai?" How could I deny him? For the next 5 minutes, my son sat enthralled, his little hands on top of the operator's big ones on the controls, as the huge machine moved the cement tubes like they were drinking straws and very quickly freed my car. For just 5 minutes, my boy played with the biggest toy tractor in the world in a sandbox that is 2 miles wide. And no building inspector was on the phone to City Hall. No foreman was quoting union regulations. No security guard was chasing my son away from private property. No policeman was asking to see his operator's license. When he was handed down to me, and he looked at me with big, solemn eyes, and he said in perfect English, "Thank you, Dad." I got to my appointment 30 minutes late, and I still had to wait for the guy I had come to meet. But I was still smiling when he finally showed up. Yeah, we like living in a place with very lax rules when that suits us. And sometimes we don't. There are 2 stories left. I have been talking for an hour. I think I will save these and finish up at in another couple days. Thanks very much for your attention, Maddie. I hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later.